Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Monday's This Is Not Therapy Hour. My name is Marie Moran. I'm an executive functioning coach with Effective Artistry, and I'm joined, as ever, by Brandon Tessers, LCPC, and Clinical Director of Effective Artistry. Hi, Brandon.
Hello, Marie. Good to be
How are
with
you
you.
doing?
Doing all right. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. Yeah. Hi to anybody who's here in the chat, whether you're watching on Twitch, YouTube, or Facebook. Thank you for being with us. If you've got questions you'd like us to address during this hour, please drop them in the chat and I'll read them out. And Brandon and I will noodle over them and see if we can come up with some answers for you. As the title of the show suggests, this is not therapy. As you said, Brandon, for oh so very many reasons. It is open office hours. It's a chance for you to ask questions of a therapist about anything that's on your mind. I guess I should tell you a bit more about Effective Artistry. It's a neurodiversity affirming therapy practice based in Northbrook, Illinois. The therapists at Effective Artistry all either identify as neurodivergent or really love working with people who identify as neurodivergent. And people who work in creative fields as well. So they're licensed to work with anybody within the state of Illinois. And alongside the therapists, there are a couple of practicing coaches, including myself, and we can work with you anywhere you are in the world, as long as you have a good internet connection, or even a dodgy one, we can figure it out. You can find out more about us on effectiveartistry.com. And we're on Twitter and Facebook and Blue Sky and Mastodon and most of the social media platforms at this point. So there's so many platforms. There's so many ways to keep in contact with people that it's a little bit overwhelming at times. Yeah, but it's great.
It is. I was talking about this somewhat over the weekend, talking about, breaks in class and technology and all various different kinds of things. But it is, I think, great that there is so much, the gatekeepers to being able to put your thoughts out there where other people can receive them have been disempowered to the extent that they have been.
That's true, yeah. And even now with billionaires taking over social media platforms and stripping them of their parts, there are alternatives out there that are user-led, which is really nice. So
I'll say Caitlin Miller is usually with us. She's not here this week. She's at a wedding, hopefully having a good time.
Yeah.
But as far as I know, she'll be back next week.
Oh, good. I'm looking forward to catching up with her. Since last week's conversation where we were talking about witchcraft and things, I've been thinking a bit about ritual and the power of ritual. And yesterday I found this book at the library, The Kitchen Witches Spell Book. So I'm going to read it and then talk to her more about that.
Cool.
But it's really nice. That's been on my mind this week a little bit, the importance of ritual and routine.
Yes, ritual and routine are both very important and interesting things.
Yeah. Whenever we sit down to chat, I always light this little owl candle, and that's my little ritual. That's my get ready to chat ritual.
Yeah.
Just
when I train either coaches or therapists, because this particular thing is the same. Whenever I train people to do this kind of work, I tell them that a session happens in four phases. And the very first one is to open up the space, which happens before the client even arrives. And a lot of that, what we're talking about is some form of, not always, but often some form of ritual. It's about getting yourself into the right place. So an executive functioning thing too, to use for good reason, to use external things, like things around you to impact you so that whatever it is you're intending to do is easier or more likely that you'll do it or whatever. Ritual is important.
Yeah.
Routine. Too much routine, not great. Too little routine, not great. How do you know exactly the right amount? You don't. You just keep fiddling around with it. But, you need to balance that in order to be able to think about new things and adapt and innovate and respond, there has to be other stuff in your day that you're not thinking about. And routine is a way to be able to kind of take some control over those things. So, like, for example, when I don't pay attention to my hunger and don't eat lunch, but know that it causes me problems, it's easier to set a routine so that I can continue to not think about my own hunger and needing to eat lunch, but that those problems don't happen as much.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can't make everything routine. Otherwise, what are you going to think about? I mean, you're making room for you to be able to pay attention to and navigate other things. There's got to be something you're thinking about. It's not the same every day.
That's true. And I find that if I have too much routine, that I start to ignore some of those signals and alarms and timers and things that go off. They sort of fade into the background, and then I'm back where I started, needing routine.
Yeah, well, honestly, a really common thing for when a person's life is quote unquote too under control. Like, there is a minimum level, you're conscious, right? Except for when you're unconscious. But if you're awake and conscious, you're conscious. And that means that something is going on in there. You don't get to choose to just not be aware of anything. You're going to be aware of things. And that, I think, is helpful. Another way to put that is there's a minimum level of stress that humans can experience, or a minimum level of worry or concern or whatever, thinking about things that are different than you want them to be and trying to problem solve it, whatever. You can't have none of it. So it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That when you don't have to worry about finding enough food and water and shelter, then you worry about the next level up of social need or safety needs, and then social needs, and then on and on. There's a reason that very wealthy people will often seem to other people to be very eccentric and like care a lot about things that the rest of us would say that doesn't matter, you're blowing it out of proportion. But especially for neurodivergent people, I think a common thing that happens is life gets enough under control that we actually do have some spare awareness and so on. And then that goes to, what's wrong with me? Why am I not happier than I am right now? Why am I still stressed out even though things have gotten better? Why am I still tired even though I've done all these things to address it and I know that that helps, but I still feel tired? What's wrong? You tend to keep looking for the same kinds of things that you have found utility in looking at in the past. So we tend to just analyze ourselves, try and figure out what's wrong and what we need to change about ourselves, even when things are going really well.
Yeah, it's funny that that's what we jump to. What's wrong with me?
I mean, it's of course, yeah, funny and of course unpleasant, and it also makes sense, like, because you have found utility in it. If theoretically you're at a place where your life is pretty good, this hypothetical we're talking about, then a major part of how you got things to that point is by doing that, by analyzing yourself and how you're feeling and what you're doing and what you could do differently. So of course it makes sense to continue to do that. Just like if a person is really struggling with pain or whatever, and then goes to the doctor and the doctor says, yes, it's this thing and here's the treatment, and you do it and it works, then of course the next time that they're in a lot of pain, they're going to say, okay, I should go talk to the doctor about it again. We keep doing the things that work.
Yeah. That has me thinking about two words that I saw online that I wanted to talk to you about at some point. Because this is about focusing inward and trying to address things that we feel are wrong. Monotropism and polytropism. Have you heard of those phrases?
I have.
Yeah.
Actually, I've never heard the word polytropism. I've heard monotropism a lot, and I can assume polytropism is another term out there. But when I've seen it discussed, people are mostly talking about monotropism because it's usually being talked about as a trait of
autism, right. And I think what I saw, I just briefly scanned something about it, and polytropism jumped out at me as something like the opposite, being more outwardly focused and your attention being directed all over the place. And it immediately screamed ADHD to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. So maybe if you want to put out there what monotropism is?
So my understanding of it, and I'll probably have to pull something up because as I said, I just scanned it.
Well, I'll say this again. It's
Understanding
one
of
of
it
those
was-
people use to mean a lot of different things. It's not about right or wrong. And looking up an official or dictionary definition will be the official or dictionary definition. It does not encompass all
Yeah.
the ways that people use this term.
So my understanding of it was being very aware of your internal experiences and being quite focused on your internal experiences, whether that's sensory or your thought process, and
Interesting.
being less focused on what's going on around you, maybe taking in less information from your environment than others, and being more focused on your inward experience. I don't know how accurate that is, but that's what I read.
Well, again, as always with language, it's not about, that is accurate to the context in which you were learning the word, seeing people use the word, right? Or I suppose sometimes what we'll do is we use context clues to kind of, make an assumption about what it is people mean by the term. And in those cases, sometimes we're interpreting it differently than it was meant even in that context. But there's still reason that you think of it that way. It was being used in a way that is a valid explanation for it. And all I can say is my understanding of monotropism is a tendency to treat things as though they are a singular thing. Like when we talk about looking for rules, for example, how do I make sure not to overshare? That's treating sharing and oversharing as though it is a singular thing, that they're not other variables and complicating factors. As well as that whatever it is you're paying attention to, you're more likely to pay attention, that thing is likely to take up all of your attention and you're only paying attention to the one thing, which obviously a lot of the time that's problematic for people, especially autistic people, is when the one thing they're paying attention to is their own internal state.
Yes.
Although I would say that that's true of ADHDers as well. And
yeah, I immediately thought of hyper focus there when you said that.
Yeah, again, a lot of these things are different terms for the same or very similar things. Some of these things are different things, but they're rooted in the same thing, like different expressions of the same thing or different responses to the same thing, or whatever. But yeah, I think for me, the easiest way to think of it is this. To me, it's so obvious that the way I'm about to say this is influenced by my history of playing games, video games, board games, role-playing games, whatever. But I think it probably doesn't come across that way to other people. I'd be curious to know. That if you think of, okay, at any given moment, I have 100 points of attention. How are those points being distributed? And if I'm paying all 100 points of attention to that couch over there, then I'm getting a lot of detailed information. It's still separate data points, right? But I'm looping it all in under the, it's about the couch. So it's one thing I'm paying attention to. Or I could split up those points and be aware of 100 different things. I mean, either way, in this hypothetical, right? Either way, there's 100 points of information I'm paying attention to. It's just a matter of, do I think of all 100 of those as belonging to one category or being under one umbrella, or as being 100 separate things?
Right.
It really is a matter of perspective. But yeah, to me, monotropism is primarily I am more likely to pay attention to something, pay 100 points of attention to something, which sometimes is in that hyper focus. I am focused on a thing which everybody would consider to be a singular thing or whatever. Other times, especially when it comes to ADHD, I'm thinking about 100 different things that to me still all relate to the same one thing, but other people would say, no, those are 100 different things. That's why we're looking for rules and stuff. Okay, this is an example, that's an example, that's an example. What's the connective tissue between all 100 different things that makes it so really I'm just thinking about one thing? It's often used as an explanation for sensitivities, for example, as well, that when you hear that sound, it becomes the only thing you can focus on and everything else gets pushed out.
Yeah.
But honestly, I don't even know if the way I'm talking about it is the official definition or not. I really don't.
That's something we could talk about for ages as well, how all of these terms have evolved different meanings. Um, yeah.
Well, I think I point this out to people, and I think it's easy to dismiss and go unheard. I'm always trying to find different places to sit or different ways to say it. But according to linguistics, like the people who study language, not linguists as in people who speak many different languages, but linguists as in those who study linguistics, language, what it is, how it evolves, etc. That the rule of correct or incorrect usage of a language is if a native speaker does it, it is correct usage. Because the only way we can even define something as being incorrect with how fluid and whatever the stuff is to say that somebody is attempting to learn a language and does it in a way that no native speakers do it, then it's useful to say that's incorrect. Even though philosophically speaking, like whether it's your second language or not, your way of using it is just as valid as any other. It's much more useful to say, like, okay, if you're trying to learn how to do it, you should follow the rules of the people who already do it. You don't have to, but that's what we're going to label as correct or incorrect. It just means what people use it to mean.
Yeah.
Why does cool mean what it means now?
I think there's a lot of tension around the term autism because of that. Because I think with the advent of more online communities and people becoming more aware of autism in general, the term has broadened to mean different things, and there are some people within the autism community who kind of rail against that, or are worried that the term has become too broad and it's too much of an umbrella for a whole bunch of different traits and states, and that it dilutes what autism means. I wonder if there's probably a connection between the medical model there versus the social model.
I mean, certainly, at least in some cases, theoretically, we could say what some of the connections are there with the medical model. But more broadly, like that's how language evolves. People use words in a particular way. Other people use it in a particular way. When there's enough of a difference and those people become aware of each other, once they realize that, hey, we're using this term differently than one another, then people will often debate over whether or not the word or the phrase or whatever the piece of language should be used the way that they use it or the other people use it. And yeah, the very specific and common version of that is there's a word that has a broadly accepted usage, and then a new group of people starts using that word in a different way. And some people say, no, it means the thing that we've always meant by it and you can't change it. And other people say, no, there was a problem with using it the way that it was being used and we need to change it. Neither side is right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's both valid points, which is why it's not typically super useful to get into debates about it.
No.
You can't disprove the other person. It just incentivizes you to ignore whatever valid points the other person is making, because you've lumped it up under, well, if I acknowledge the validity of their position, that means that I'm saying they're right and I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Which I think does play into monotropism. Like the idea that a thing must be a thing in a certain way, it's right, or if it's not, it's wrong. It's a lack of nuance, wanting to be able to categorize things. Again, very common autistic observable things. We want to be able to say, this is categorically this is categorically that. And if you say that this is that, you are categorically wrong, or I am categorically wrong. Again, most of the time when we're doing that, it's useful to us. That's why we keep doing it, but not always. Autism, by the way, as a word, people never think about, including me, until someone called my attention to it a few years back, what that word is, like etymologically. We know it is what that suffix does to a word, but the root is AUT, auto.
Self.
Autism is called autism as a way of saying it's a person who is completely isolated to themselves. And that's why that usage of monotropism that you're talking about, focusing on their own internal experience, which I think is a way people use it. I mean, I think that you're actively actually interpreting the way that it was used in the context where it was used. But that way of using it reinforces that kind of medical model, deficiency model, of autism that, oh, they're unaware of it.
Yeah.
And they're aware of their own experience. Which the funny thing to me then is philosophy, we don't need to go down this path, but the funny thing to me is, yeah, of course. And also, you think anybody else is different? Like, in what way you unaware of anything which isn't filtered through their own perception?
Yeah.
Quite literally, your consciousness doesn't hear sounds from sound waves. Sound waves hit the eardrum and then they're translated into electrical signals on the nerves. Whatever consciousness is, you cannot be aware of anything other than the signals your own body creates. Theoretically, in response to external things, right? Like we assume that it would be pretty difficult to navigate life if we didn't assume that we're perceiving things which actually exist in reality. But this is why I say I have that problem with people calling things narcissistic and whatever. It's everything everybody experiences is obviously filtered through their own biases, perceptions. Like it must be.
Yeah.
So why are we going to say some people do and some people don't, and the ones who do are the ones that are wrong? Anyway, philosophy.
So there is utility in it, but there's a limit to that utility.
Yeah. That's why I think that like calling things tools is such a useful metaphor, because a hammer is a useful tool. It allows a person to do things that they couldn't do without the hammer, and or to do things that they theoretically could do without the hammer, but much more efficiently, like a much lower cost for the same or higher value. It's a useful thing. No one is going to claim that a hammer isn't a useful tool for the things for which it is useful. Putting nails into wood or taking them out again or whatever. But then when somebody says, okay, well, now I need to cut this piece of wood in half, and they try and use a hammer to do it, and it goes terribly, and it doesn't work at all, and causes a lot of problems, and probably even injures themselves and ruins the materials and whatever. And then they'll sometimes say, see, a hammer is a broken tool. Nobody should be using a hammer. Now, it's useful for what it is useful for.
Yeah.
Try to use it for other things, which how would we discover the limits of its utility unless we're trying to use it for something else and realize, oh, nope, it's not useful for this. So sometimes we're going to use it for things that it's not useful for. And we don't need to reject the tool and say it has no utility and get rid of it out of our toolbox, because then all that means is the next time we need a hammer and a nail, we're trying to do it with the flat of a saw. Like, you collect tools, you use them for what they're useful for. Sometimes a new tool is more efficient or beneficial or whatever at everything that an old tool was. It's just straight up an advantageous replacement. And yes, in those cases, you can throw away the old tool. But the vast majority of the time, no. Each tool is the best suited for some specific thing, or it wouldn't have been invented. Or it wouldn't have, if it had been invented, it wouldn't become widespread enough for you to become aware of it, right? Like by the time you or I hear of a word, it's a word that people have been using for something that, for whatever reason, that word is more useful than whatever other words they could have theoretically used in the past.
Yeah.
So yeah, trying to get rid of this stuff, trying to say people are right or wrong in the way. There's absolutely validity to the idea that different people who, even if we say we can accurately label these different people as all being autistic, have very different experiences. And some of those are even pretty broad and categorical. I'm getting off into any like widely held belief, even when it is problematic, and even when there are obviously things about it which are invalid and harmful and whatever. If it's widely held, it's at least an attempt to address some valid concern.
Right.
Even when the belief itself doesn't actually address the concern, it wouldn't become widespread if people didn't at least think or feel as though it addresses the concern. And when you treat a belief because it is problematic or even inaccurate or whatever, when you treat it as though that means that there's no validity to the people who hold it, like that their concerns are invalid, then you just end up, even if you're right or whatever, you just end up in arguments with people, and it prevents progress for everybody, because now you can't acknowledge the limitations of your own belief for fear of the people that you are arguing against saying, see, even you acknowledge that your belief has limitations. Anyway, I'm being very vague because I don't want to take anything away from anybody or whatever, but yes, this is a big part of like the debates online about neurodiversity and medical model and person first or identity first language, or is it okay to call something ADHD or not, or time blindness or time agnosia, or these are valuable conversations to have. There's not a way to say what is the correct answer or incorrect answer, because language is always going to come down to at some point a matter of opinion. And I have my own. I don't want to make it sound like I don't have opinions on which are better usage and whatever. I do. But I have to acknowledge that other people have their own too, and they're without.
Your sound is a little muffled. I don't know why that is. So.
I don't know. Let's see.
Like, I mean, my take on the term ADHD, it's not a unique take, is that it's really inaccurate of the traits that cause us the most issues. But it's the best we have for the moment. And everybody knows what we mean when we say ADHD. So, you know, it works. Yeah.
Yep. And then sometimes people are going to say, because sometimes people are going to realize on their own, like, wait a second, this is not an attention deficit. We shouldn't call it that. And that's a valid thing. And also, this is what people call it, or this is what people mean by it. And would it be better if we all use different term? I might agree. So things that I look back on now in my life and realize, like, oh, what a clear and strong sign of me being somebody that would be identified as neurodivergent, but didn't think of it that way at the time. I used to talk a lot when I was a teenager about the world of the ideal and the world of the practical, and that it's important and it's valid and helpful to think about what would be ideal in this scenario, what would be the best thing to be able to do, or how would it be, you know, if things were structured in such a way, what would be the best way for that? And then there's the other of like, okay, well, this is what is right now. And that if you focus on one or the other and ignore the opposite, if you focus on figuring out what would be the best way, the optimal, ideal thing, and don't pay a lot of attention to what is, you don't end up making any changes. You just, you know, are very unhappy with how things are, which is valid. But in order to actually navigate the world and do things, you have to know what it is that is happening, what is practical. Yeah. And on the flip side, if all you pay attention to is what is happening and what's practical and never think about what would theoretically be better, then you also don't make any changes because you haven't thought about what changes might be worth making. That if you actually want to make changes, you've got to marry those two things together. Say, here's where we're at. Here's what I think will be better. What is something that can be done to move us in that direction? And I think as a group, neurodivergent people are more likely to focus on the realm of the ideal and what things should be and what's wrong with how things are. And as a group, not as focused on how do we actually make this actionable.
I feel like you're reading my mind because I was thinking about this very thing today in terms of my own situation where I am in life right now.
Really?
And how I spend a lot of time thinking about how things would be in an ideal world, but not always putting the steps in place to make that happen.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's an individual level thing, right? That like, I'm very aware of what it is that's happening that I think is bad, what I'm doing wrong or what I'm failing at or whatever, and very aware of what would be better, at least in theory, you know, like sometimes in very general terms, not actionable ones, whatever. but I struggle with translating, hey, this would be a good idea to do. Hey, I should do this, whatever, translating that into actually like actionable things that then happen. That's kind of the whole like linchpin of ADHD symptoms, right? That if a person wasn't struggling with having ideas of what would be better, but not enacting those ideas, would be very unlikely to say that that person has ADHD.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that also does translate to the groups and to large scale advocacy. We tend to be more focused on what would be good if it were to happen than how to like move in that direction, or what we can accomplish right now and how do we get started,
So is it that we have a lot of ideas, or is it that we focus on the fact that we don't execute on all those ideas? Like,
Well,
how do we know that we have more ideas than anybody who doesn't identify as neurodivergent?
we don't. We don't know. What we do know is that when you're experiencing distress about the fact that I have all these things that I should be doing and I'm not doing them, we know that the sources of distress is the gap between how much you're thinking about, like how many ideas you're thinking you need to do or should do, and how many you think you're actually doing. If you think you're doing 1 out of 10 of those things, you're probably most likely going to feel like, oh man, I am not accomplishing much. And if you're doing 90 out of 100 of those things, then you're probably going to feel like I'm killing it. This is great.
Yeah.
Now, so the ratio, the proportion is what matters. And yes, it could be that I accomplish 100 things in a day, which is the average number of things that a person accomplishes, but I have 1,000 ideas and the average person has 200. So I end up feeling significantly worse than other people about my ability to accomplish things. And of course, it could also be, no, everybody has 100 ideas and most people do 90 of them and I'm doing 10. And that's why I feel, or any like combination in between, we don't know.
Yeah.
But more importantly, it's such a neurodivergent thing to wonder about that.
Yeah, right.
Because why does it matter? Like, why does it matter if I have more ideas but accomplish about the same as other people? Or if I have about the same amount of ideas but accomplish less of it than other people? Why does the comparison to the other people part matter?
Mm-hmm. This is where social sensitivity comes in again.
Right. It would only theoretically be useful if I came to the conclusion that, oh, I think it's that I'm accomplishing fewer ideas but having the same amount. So therefore, I should try and figure out how other people accomplish more in a day. I'm trying to get how much I do to go up. And if I think it's the other way, I would want to try and figure out how do other people either have fewer ideas than me, which I've never once had a client who didn't say at some point some version of, I wish I was normal, I wish I was dumber, I wish I was oblivious, whatever. We try that.
Mm-hmm.
Or how does everybody else not feel as bad about the fact that they're not accomplishing as much of the ideas as, like if it's similar proportion, why do I feel so bad about it? So either way, it guides what you're looking for from other people to try and learn from them, which is great. It's useful. But again, neurodivergent people, we tend to end up with this idea that there's a way to figure it out correctly. Which of those two things it is? How would you even in theory figure that out? Like, how are you going to measure the amount of ideas that a person has, or how many things a person accomplishes, without dealing with the fact that I could say pouring cereal into the bowl and then setting the box of cereal down are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
Or I could say that I made breakfast and that's one thing. It's...
Yeah.
So it's much more useful to just act as though it's a certain way. Which again goes right back to what we're talking about. You can think about things, and it's useful to think about things. At a certain point, you hit a threshold at which continuing to think about the thing is not going to be much more valuable. And you need to just get more information, often by testing something and seeing how it goes. And neurodivergent people, by and large, we tend to blow right past that point.
Yes, I was just thinking that. No, I want to skip to the end.
What's that?
I want to skip to the end. Don't make me do the data collection bit.
Or like, okay, I haven't figured this thing out yet, but if I keep thinking about it, I will probably figure it out. And what's actually happening observably is that I'm feeling worse and worse and worse, that actually I'm doing less and less of the things that I'm trying to accomplish and everything's going poorly. But I'm still focused on, I got to just figure this out by thinking about it instead of just trying, because I'm not going to try it until I have figured out what will work. So here's a useful framework for me, something I share with people. Thinking, like cognition, what happens in your head, it's just a less efficient version of talking to other people, communicating with people. Whatever you can accomplish this way is something you could have also accomplished by communicating with other people. Obviously, there are advantages to doing it this way sometimes, but in terms of like, there are many times where communicating with others will help and this doesn't. And there's not really theoretically, that's not true in reverse, that there's something you can accomplish only this way, but not by having community. In large part because when you're thinking, you're really just communicating with your mental models of other people. What would they think? What would normal people do? What would so on, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, here's what happens in cognition. I like to think of it like the holodeck from Star Trek, which if anybody is not aware of, it's this big empty room, but you program it to do something and then it makes it into the reality of, like you can say you want to go skydiving and all of a sudden everything around you looks and feels as though you're skydiving, even though you're still safe in that room. The benefit of cognition is that we can test things out without risking any physical harm. If I think, what if I try this? Oh no, I would die. I don't actually in reality physically die. So it's very useful to be able to try things out there. But what that means is this is for figuring out what won't work. You cannot ever figure out what will work 100%, because all you can do at the best is to say, what about this? Oh no, that wouldn't work because, and I have a definitive thought or reason to point to. That wouldn't work because, and I have something to point to. What about this? I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work. Does it mean that it will work? No, because there are all kinds of things I'm not aware of or that I think are irrelevant that later on it turns out, oh, yep, now I know for next time to think about this thing won't work. But until I experience that, the best you can get to is just, I don't see any reason this wouldn't work. You can't get to this will work. So the framework for me, the way to know that, hey, it's time to try something, test something out, or get more information, communicate with somebody I need more data. The way to know when it's time for that is when you switch from, I need to come up with something that might work, to, I don't know what the problem is. Okay. That makes sense. There's a lot of times where it's like, I haven't come up with every idea I have come up with, I've been able to figure out why it's not a good idea. At a certain point, you come up with an idea that you haven't been able to figure out why it's not a good idea, but you are saying, but it still might not be, and I might just not know. That's the point at which you got to get more information. Mm-hmm. If you can't figure out in your head that it's a bad idea, then you're not going to figure out in your head whether or not it's a bad idea unless you decide.
Yeah.
This is why the longer we think, we end up getting stuck on the most negative things, the scariest things, whatever. Because if we get to that point, which by the way happens the vast majority of the time, we get to that point and then we just do the thing and it works. In the rare instances in which we get to that point, but we don't try something, where we want to be more careful, it's because whatever the risk of failure on that thing is terrifying. If it was very low stakes, we would have tried it. So yeah, the stuff that we end up thinking about the most is the stuff that is the scariest or the worst theoretically if it doesn't go well. What if everybody hates me? What if I die? What if I am rejected and banished to the wilderness?
It's the stuff that matters the most to us.
Yeah, the stuff that we're most afraid of, the negative consequences of failure. Yeah. And again, hard to address that because it's rational. When the stakes are high, yeah, you should probably be more careful. Mm-hmm. Which there's the key there is, this is the holodeck, right? Communicating with people is how you get more information into those holodeck programs. If I'm considering something where the penalty for failure is that I will die. And I'm not very confident that the idea I've come up with, I'm like, I don't see a reason it won't work, but I'm not very confident that it will. I'm not going to try it. But what I can do is communicate with other people, get other people's thoughts, input, information. Maybe other people have tried it and can share with me what's the problem, or just help point out flaws that I've missed, or offer solutions that I haven't considered, or whatever. Which then means that the most likely time we're going to get stuck on something is when the thing that we're afraid of going poorly is communicating with other people.
Yep. Yeah. This is where people go, well, I should be able to do it by myself. I shouldn't need to ask for help. I should be independent and self-sufficient. Should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't want to tell when the risk is, if I communicate with somebody about it, it could go very poorly and the stakes are very high. That's when we're most likely to get stuck, because you can't try the thing without communicating about it. A lot easier to problem solve and brainstorm about, like, I don't know, I'm trying to invent this thing. Let me talk to people to help me invent it, than it is to say, all right, I think that person really hates me. How do I talk to them about it to find out? So in some ways, this is a very facetious way to put it, but in some ways, neurodivergent people are oftentimes the most stubborn people about, no, I will figure this out without actually having to talk to anybody or test anything.
Yep.
Which, anything that you do that causes you problems, that you do in some repeated or predictable way, means that the vast majority of the time that you do that thing, it's very beneficial. Otherwise, you would stop. Humans are very adaptable. We change really quickly. I know that's counter to the way that a lot of people think about things.
Mm.
But for example, if you take glasses that make everything appear to be upside down and put it on somebody, for the first 10 seconds, they're nauseous and queasy and whatever. And then they start to figure it out. And I could be misquoting the results on this, but I want to say that it's 15 minutes in and you can operate with a similar level of fluency. That's how long it takes to change the way you see the world. So when something just doesn't work, think about, if you move your body in a way that hurts, how quickly do you stop moving your body in that way?
Right, ASAP.
Right. And if there's any exception to that, because some people will think, well, but sometimes I force myself, if this thing hurts and I make myself do it anyway, because it's important enough to, right? That you're thinking, yes, this hurts, and yet I have to do it anyway because X, Y, or Z. So that's the point, is when you do something that doesn't work, that causes problems or pain or discomfort or distress or whatever, you stop doing it very quickly, unless there's some reason, some incentive you have to continue doing it. And very commonly the incentive is because it pays off. Yes, it hurts, it's uncomfortable, whatever, but if I do it long enough, sure, it hurts to lift these weights, but I'm doing that on purpose because it pays off. Yes, I'm exhausted from studying for this exam, but I'm doing it anyway because it pays off. Which is great. Again, it's true some of the time. Other times, we push ourselves and we experience pain and it never pays off.
And we're taught as well that perseverance is a virtue.
Yeah.
So we're conditioned to think that we have to keep pushing and pushing.
Yeah.
But like you said last week, we should learn to quit. or find a workaround.
Yeah, I mean, of course, really it's about adapting, paying attention to what is happening rather than whether you think it should be happening differently or not, and adapt. But a way that makes it stick in people's minds more is to say, quit. When you try a thing and it doesn't work, quit. You can't try a new and different thing until you quit trying the one that isn't working.
Yeah.
I'm exhausted. I just need to get myself to go to bed early. Great. Good idea. If it works, awesome. If it doesn't work, how many days you want to keep trying it without it working before you say, you know what, let me see if there's something else I can try that might make me feel less exhausted. We're taught that perseverance, by the way, this is not evil capitalism or whatever. Again, it's true.
Mm-hmm.
When we're young and adults say, hey, this thing isn't super enjoyable right now, but it will pay off, sometimes it is true. Of course, we should learn to listen to other people and say, even though my experience of this is miserable, they're saying it pays off. There's value in that. Again, the problem is just that sometimes we're right and sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes the person believes that it will pay off for you, and it just turns out that they're wrong. Sometimes the person doesn't believe that it will pay off for you, but they want you to keep doing it anyway, so they lie to you about it. And sometimes you believe them, and sometimes you don't. This is that monotropism thing again for me. It's like, it would be so wonderful to just say, how do I know when it'll pay off or it won't? And yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, let me just check my crystal ball.
Right. So since we can't do that, it's worth predicting to some extent. Do I think this will go well? Do I think this will pay off? But you got to know you're not going to be right all the time. So as opposed to the strategy of, I'm not doing it until I can figure out exactly to make sure how it will go, you say, I'm going to think about this until I have a certain confidence level, until I'm 60% certain it'll work out. And a lot of the more practical exercises I do with people is aimed around these kinds of things, like the odds and stakes exercise, or, how likely do you think it is that it'll go the way you want it to go? And can anything be done that might make that likelihood go up from 50 to 51? Does that doing that thing mean it'll work? No, but it makes it more likely. So then how much does it cost you? And what's the value of taking it up? I won't, blah, 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 all that stuff. Just dealing with nuance. But anyway, the focus needs to be, I put as much thought into, will this work or how will this go, as I can tell is appropriate or useful. And then I focus on, how do I make sure that I'm monitoring to be able to tell whether it's going the way I think it should or not, whether the way I predicted or not. And if not, how do I adapt? In these online circles you're talking about, a very common version of this is, how do I make sure that I don't offend anybody? You can't. And the harder you try to make sure that you don't offend, if you think it is possible to never offend somebody, then the harder you try to do it, the more angry you will be at somebody who eventually points out to you that you offended them.
Yeah.
The more incentivized you'll be to say, no, you're wrong, because I did all the things I'm supposed to do, and I used the language correctly, and I thought through it, and blah, blah, blah. So you're just being a jerk. But if you understand that you can't be right all of the time, then the more work you put into trying never to offend someone, the better you'll get at it. And when you actually do end up offending somebody, you will approach that with genuine, authentic curiosity. I'm sorry. It's very important to me not to offend anybody. And obviously I did offend you. Can you please help me understand how I did? Because had I known that's how it would go, I wouldn't have done it. There's something I'm missing. Can you please help me understand it? Which, if you care about research and that kind of stuff, all of the research, every single bit of it, shows that whether you want to call it intelligence or successful outcomes or whatever good, positive thing, correlates with that second thing. The more you understand that you can't actually be right, call it intellectual humility, sometimes that's what it's called, call it cultural humility versus cultural competence, right? Like, if I think I understand, I don't know, pick any identity of person, I understand autistic people, then whenever a person who identifies as autistic in any way contradicts what I'm thinking or saying, I will just say they're wrong, because I understand autistic people. I've learned to be culturally competent for autistic people, as opposed to cultural humility of, no, I know that I don't understand. Like racism, everybody has, we know, implicit bias. You can't not have that. That's not an option. But if you think it is possible for a person to not be biased in any way, and you think it's bad to be biased, then you're just very highly incentivized to ignore any biases you have that are pointed out to you. But if you understand, no, I have my biases, because you literally, we can't operate as human beings without being able to lump things together into broad categories, including other people. You can't know each individual person. So you just do your best. And when you're wrong, you say, oh, okay, I noticed now that I'm wrong. I heard that. I took in that feedback. I learned the new thing, and I make a change.
And being open like that opens up more of the world to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
in the big 5 personality factors thing, which I have my issues with the idea of personality, just the whole thing. But the big 5 factor personality model is kind of the most, I don't know, widely viewed positively way of looking at that stuff over the past, I don't know, decade or so. And of the 5, one is openness to new experience. So a lot of the research I'm talking about is about that, correlating openness to new experiences with basically everything. How people viewing you positively, right? Like there's research that shows that people view other people more positively when they read that other person as having intellectual humility. That when you say, I know everything, people don't like you as much as when you say, I don't know everything. Seems like a pretty self-evident conclusion. And yet all of us walk around being like, oh, I can't reveal to them that I don't know because then they won't like me.
Yeah, that's true. We're all afraid of appearing less than. But we're all afraid of appearing less than.
Yeah. That's why I keep trying to get everybody to understand that it isn't. That to me is what neurodiversity is. That this is not a competition.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I am demonstrably taller than most people. That doesn't mean I'm more valuable.
Yeah.
So any other trait which varies naturally, not pathologically, among human beings, why would any other trait be something that we say makes one person better or more valuable if they have more or less of it or in a further direction than, like literally anything?
Yeah, that's a dangerous path.
Yeah. If there's anything which varies among humans and that you can say with some like reason or accuracy or whatever, and you can say that one way of being is better globally than the other, then what we're talking about is called pathology. That's illness or injury. So yes, we can say that it's always better to not have cancer than to have cancer. That's a variation among humans that nobody would ever select the have cancer option. Which isn't to say that good experiences don't come from having cancer or whatever. Like, it's just to say about the thing itself, not the things that it's connected to or happens in conjunction with. No one would choose to have cancer over not having cancer. So that we call a pathology. And the problem with the medical model is that got applied to certain things, like, for example, being autistic, that people would effectively, the argument that people are making when they're saying that autism is pathological, that it's a medical disease or whatever, the argument that they're making is no one would ever choose to be that way versus the other way. No one would ever choose it. Not there are downsides to it, because I can acknowledge that there are downsides to it and still choose it, prefer it, whatever. So it's not that it's saying, we're not trying to erase that there are downsides or disabilities or whatever. It's just if you're calling it pathological, you're saying it is in no way preferable to the alternative. That's not how a person is meant to be.
But if you ask an autistic person if they would prefer not to be autistic, you're asking them they would like to be somebody other than who they are.
Yeah. So it is different in that way from, say, asking someone who is diagnosed with major depressive disorder, because in most cases people would say, yeah, no, I would rather not have the things which qualify me as, clinically diagnosed as having this disorder. I would rather not have it. But when you ask an autistic person or an ADHD person, would you rather not have any of these things? Well, that's complicated. And that's not even getting into that, like, one of the diagnostic criteria for autism spectrum disorder is struggles in social situations, which is not that's a culturally defined thing. Yes. So how are we even going to say, anyway, we're getting off onto the same. Just the point of all of this, when you're thinking about what it is to be a person, a human being, like our species, and what we are adapted for, physically, biologically, cognitively, like everything, I think it is helpful to think that the most important unit to consider is the community, not the individual. Mm-hmm. Beings are not evolved in any way, even if you don't believe in the theory of evolution, like in broad sense. Even just talking about like the ideas we come up with and propagate and the beliefs and the values that we have as a culture, like, none of those are things that are designed around the idea of thriving as an individual. We suck at all of it. Quite literally, everybody watching this, ask yourself, what is the age at which you think a human child would be completely able to survive with no outside support? And you'll come up with different age, different people will say different things, but it's not younger than 2, probably. I would be shocked if anybody said less than that. So at minimum, we're saying with 2 years of support and training and development from a bunch of other humans, then maybe you can survive on your own. And even that, I would say no human is ever capable of fully independent survival. You put people in solitary confinement, within a week, you can see brain damage on scans, like physical signs of it. We are not designed to do anything alone. So any attempt to do things in the ways that would make most sense to do, if being able to do everything by yourself was the way that we were, is going to fail. And then neurodivergent people will often get stuck with, I'm trying to do this and that and this to make it so that I can do everything independently, and it's not working. What's wrong with me? Instead of, it's not working, maybe my idea that I should be able to do all this stuff independently is flawed, and I should try a different thing.
Yeah. I feel like that sometimes comes from an assumption that other people are holding it together better and we're somehow catching up.
I know, this is
but
one of my...
Other people are not doing it in isolation.
Sure, yes, there's that. I mean, if you're thinking of a neurotypical person, kind of by definition, what you're thinking of is somebody who doesn't have as much problem communicating with others around them and asking for help and getting support and being understood.
Yeah.
That's even just in theory. In reality, what in the hell makes you think other people have it so together?
Yeah, right.
Like, one of my favorite things about us as a community of people who identify as neurodivergent is that we talk about this concept of masking all the time. I've fooled everyone into thinking that I don't struggle. I've fooled everyone into thinking that this thing doesn't cost me as much as it costs me, or that it's easier for me than it really is, or that I'm doing better than I really am. And we never think that other people might be doing that same thing.
Yeah.
That maybe when I think that other people are doing so well, that maybe they have fooled me into thinking that they're doing better than they really are, just like I know can happen because I do it. Wouldn't that be a logical assumption? Maybe everybody is trying to do what I'm trying to do. We're all products of the same culture, and we're all trying to give everybody else the impression that we are fine and that we accomplish everything by ourselves and that we never struggle or need help from anybody, or that in the cases in which we do need help are cases in which it is justified and people should be giving it to us. Or maybe we're all just thinking some version, which is not to erase differences. People are different.
Yeah. But the phrase "fake it till you make it" comes to mind.
Right. Do we have to say that that particular thing is definitely one of the differences, or could it be that in that way people are more or less different intensities and specific, experiences and impacts and etc. But the idea that we are all generally in our culture trying to give an impression to others that we are doing better than we maybe really are. Mm-hmm. Couldn't that be a universal thing without taking away the fact that some people are different in other ways? Yeah. Or, And if that's the case, again, just logically, if just for a moment, hypothetically, you explore the idea, what if everybody is struggling more than I think they are? Then how would that change the things that you're evaluating and the things that you're attempting? Like, if you let go of this assumption that not only do other people accomplish the things that you are failing to accomplish, but that most people do, and that they do it without even having to try very hard at it, it just happens. If you let go of that idea that everybody else accomplishes this stuff that I'm struggling with so easily, that would change pretty significantly the things that you're thinking about doing, the way you evaluate yourself, and the strategies you come up with and attempt to execute. For one, it would incentivize communicating with other people a lot more. And hey, coincidentally, as somebody who communicates a lot with a lot of people, very authentic and vulnerable ways, not just as a therapist, but certainly that's a big part of it, but my whole life. Where do you think I'm getting all this information that I'm sharing with everybody right now of everybody attempts to give a better impression of what they're experiencing broadly, not in every specific circumstance, than is true. Everybody would rather not need other people's help. I know that because I've talked to enough people
Yeah, right.
to find out that that's the case. And when we discover that and explore that, it is almost always helpful. Again, hypothetically, just for a moment, pretend that's true and try and solve the problem you're solving from that lens, that maybe what you're trying to accomplish is impossible for everyone, not easy for most people and difficult for you. How would that change? What new ideas would you come up with? And then test one of those ideas and see how that goes. Because if you are thinking the thing that I keep failing to accomplish is easy for everybody else, then I can say, by definition, the things you've been trying have not been working, or you wouldn't continue to think that you are struggling and failing to do this thing, right? So try for a moment. Try something else that is something that you would try if it was theoretically impossible to accomplish what you're trying, but that there might be other ways to make it better or get closer or whatever. Try that and see how it goes. Most of the time you'll find, I think, that it works better.
I think that's a really nice point to end on. We're at time. So
Yeah.
Thank you. This has been really fun, as always. And if you joined us, thank you for watching along. If you've got any questions, you'll find us all over social media at Effective Artistry. Feel free to drop us a line anytime.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Marie.
All right. See you next week.
Yeah. See you next week.